The operation is dubbed Operation Epic Fury by the United States in hopes. We saw the President of the United States after the first strikes, excuse me, very early this morning, advocated for the Iranian people to take to the streets and toss the incumbent government, toss what the remnant of the regime, what's left of it, to overtake government buildings, to conquer key institutions, and who know, like this may start to become a reality. Remember, this is only day one, and the supreme leader is no longer breathing, or supreme for that matter. So a pretty catastrophic day for the regime. However, I've made this analogy a couple times. The regime is built to survive, not to thrive, and it's like whack-a-mole. However, the whack-a-mole analogy is getting a little weaker because now the supreme leader has been whacked down. So now they're losing institutional legitimacy, and as I mentioned earlier, the ability for the next supreme leader to have legitimacy is only going to increase in difficulty in the future. Right. So, along with joint strikes with Israel, the United States and Israel eliminated the supreme leader, targeted other relevant personnel within the regime and Revolutionary Guard leadership, as well as other clerical leadership. Remember, Iran's a theocracy, so you gotta get after them both ways. You gotta get after the clerical side of it and the military/political side of the regime. We're going to do a little bit of a timeline, some backstory. I've kind of mentioned a couple things, like the assassination of Qasem Soleimani on January 3rd, 2020. And you also have, the United States leaves the Iran nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, back in 2018. That next year, the Revolutionary Guard is deemed a terrorist organization. Then Soleimani is killed the year after that. We see additional sanctions against the regime in the following years. And then we really get to the proxies are degraded. Hezbollah, much weaker than they ever have been, with Operation Grim Beeper, the pager attack against Hezbollah personnel. And then 10 days later, Nasrallah is killed in the decapitation strikes. So pretty big deal with the crown jewel proxy, with some definitely rust. Definitely got a little rusty there. The Houthi, the campaign in the Red Sea against the Houthis in March and spring of 2025 degraded their capabilities and made them kind of retreat / pull back a little bit. And Hamas has been essentially utterly destroyed with the conflict of the past since October 7th. So that's a quick little backstory of where we got. But now let's go back to last June. The 12-day war. The Israelis, it's a surprise attack targeting key Revolutionary Guard personnel within the country. I wouldn't say decapitation strikes necessarily. However, some major, once you kill the top dog of a post or a commandment center, now you have a bunch of backups. It's almost like Peyton Manning gets injured, and then you have the random backup who's only played 5 snaps in his career step in. Imagine that for 65 to 70% of the military apparatus for the regime. That's what happened back in June. So you have a lot of new figures in this war now, right? It was a pre-attack for what has happened today and what's going to happen the next several days. Iranians retaliated, right? We did see they did crack through the Iron Dome a little bit again with some attacks against financial centers within Israel. But the biggest thing was the attacks, Operation Midnight Hammer, against the 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities, in particular Fordow. Now we see there's kind of mixed messaging, right? We hear they're obliterated, but then we hear the last couple of days that they're about to build a nuclear bomb again. So there's definitely some kind of, yeah, you're either lying then or you're lying now kind of deal. But the main point, the main takeaway is that it degraded the regime further. However, not total collapse again. What I just said, not totally collapsed. However, the nuclear capabilities were maybe not obliterated, but they were absolutely delayed, delayed and damaged rather than obliterated and maybe ostracized, let's say. Key personnel within the Revolutionary Guard eliminated. Other relevant military complexes and barracks, resource centers damaged, destroyed, blown up. The proxy networks, again, the proxies really couldn't help out because they're still kind of beat up. But the key thing is that the regime survived, right? At least at that time, the supreme leader was not killed or even targeted during those attacks, during that little conflict last June. But it sets the stage for what is happening currently. Something else I think that got underreported in particular was in the original Iran, the JCPOA, even though the United States left the conflict, or not conflict, excuse me, left the deal in 2018, it didn't mean it collapsed for everything, right? A lot of countries signed this nuclear deal agreement. And as long as Iran had always had International Atomic Inspection, I don't know, like the IAEA, the International Atomic Inspection Agency, something of that matter, they always were able to avoid the snapback sanctions from the Europeans. However, they abandoned discussions with the IAEA in September of 2025, causing these additional snapback sanctions, only further isolating the country on a global trade market and global ways to make deals with countries. And it essentially only made it to where the Strait of Hormuz was their their main survival point. Still having 20% of the global oil supply, that's still a pretty strong poker card. However, we saw the sanctions hit. And then I think the next slide is going to basically have a result of what happened after these snapback. It only accelerated the economic isolation and uncertainties within the country. If you go back to the 2026 election prediction video, or excuse me now, bold predictions for 2026, these street protests in the nation began, aggressive protests against the regime for economic dissatisfaction. The currency totally folded. The dollar, or like the Iranian dollar, or whatever it's called, was essentially worthless, right? It not worth anything. I remember, if you saw the reporting that the regime offered what was equivalent to $7 a month to stay home. I'm not sure how accurate that is, but it almost sounds made up, honestly. But inflation grows out of control. Nobody can afford anything. And as I mentioned, the youth population, 30% of it, or 35% of the population is at age 30 or under. So they're people my age that are not able to advance at all, so that causes stress and long-term thinking stress, right? Protests they occur in all major cities. The regime is even weakened a little more because some of them grow violent and people get killed. Maybe it's security personnel or civilian life individuals, and it shows for the first time that there is some sense of bravery, or not the first time I should say that this has ever happened, but another example of weakness within the regime. There's now a boldness of these people to go out and protest in the streets. However, again, the accuracy of these, it's kind of semi-difficult to understand. maybe confirmed, but at least from where we say is that tens of thousands were killed by the government. And it is a population. Thanks to the Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson interview, we know that Iran has a little over 92 million people that live within its borders.